welcome to direct and inverse proportion. Just before we start, just a reminder that there is a notes jotter available for this video. Just check the description below for a download link and you can work along with me as we go through the video. So we're going to start with the question, y is directly proportional to x when y equals 35, x equals 7. Find the value of y when x equals 9. Now, first of all, what does the phrase directly proportional to actually mean? Well, it means that there is a direct relationship, a direct multiplicative relationship between x and y. And so basically it's saying that if something is directly proportional, we have a constant of proportionality, something which is always being multiplied by the expression in order to form y. And so we set this up with a very simple process. Every single time, the order that it comes up in the question is very important. So y is directly proportional to. Now this introduces a new symbol. This is not a letter alpha. It's often just sort of called a fish. It is the symbol for proportionality. So this is reading as y is proportional to x. But proportional to doesn't allow us to actually solve a problem. In order to solve it, we need an equation. And therefore, we need to turn this fish symbol into an equals. And so y equals some number of x. We need a constant, something that we are multiplying by. And so this constant we call k. Now, it's not c, which would make a little bit more sense if we were talking about constants, but that would possibly get mixed up in terms of y equals mx plus c. And so we use k in this case for the constant of proportionality. So y equals kx. They are being multiplied together. Now, because we have y equals kx, how do we use that in order to actually solve the problem? Well, it comes to the second line of our question. When y equals 35, x equals 7, that is telling us a relationship, something where we can substitute those values in. And therefore, y can become 35, k remains exactly as it is, k times, and x is 7. So 35 equals k times 7. How would I find k? Well, I'm going to have to divide by 7. On both sides. If I divide by 7 on both sides, 35 divided by 7 is 5, and that would leave me with just k. And it tells me that k equals 5. And so this is stage 1 of the process complete. We're going to go to stage 2 using a formula that we've now created. We've been told that k equals 5, and so we can actually say that y is 5x. So what that's saying is, in this case, no matter what x is, y will always be 5 times bigger. And so find the value of y when x equals 9. Well, that would mean that y is 5 times 9. And 5 times 9 is 45. And so there we go, we've solved our problem. So our next question says y is directly proportional to the square of x. When y equals 36, x equals 3. Find the value of y when x equals 5. So there is not much difference between this question and the previous one, except for the phrase square of x. So what does that mean? Well, y is directly proportional to the square of x. The square of x simply means x squared. So in this case, the relationship is to do with the x value being squared and then multiplied by something in order to make y. And so, once again, we go through the same process. We need to turn our proportion formula into an equation. So y equals k x squared, bring in our constant of proportionality. And then we come to our second line of our working out. When y equals 36, x equals 3. So we're going to replace our y value with 36. We're going to replace x squared with 3. So that is k times 3 squared. And in this case, what is 3 squared? Well, 3 squared is 9. So that means 36 equals k times 9. And so what must k be? Well, I'm going to divide by 9 on both sides. And if I do that, I get that k equals 4. I've found the constant of proportionality, and so now I can continue with the work in order to find the value of y when x equals 5. So I'm going to go back to the original equation. So y equals, instead of k, I can now say that that is 4x squared. And I've been told to find the value of y when x equals 5. So I'm going to put that into my equation. 4 times 5 squared. What is 5 squared? Well, that is 25. So y is 4 times 25. Y equals 100. So next we get a question where y is inversely proportional to x. Now what this means is that as x increases, y is actually going to decrease. There is an inverse relationship between them. But to deal with this, we actually just use the idea that an inverse proportion is exactly the same as a direct proportion. So y is directly proportional to 1 over the value, so 1 over x this time. So an inverse proportion is just like having a direct proportion to the reciprocal of 1 over. And so we now go through the same process as we did before. We need to now change this into an equation. So we need to change it into equals. Now if I multiply 1 over x by k, well that will give me k over x. And so my formula becomes y equals k over x. And all I'm going to do is go to my second line in the question and replace my y and x values. So y equals 15, k over 4. So how am I going to work out what k is this time? Well, because I'm dividing by 4, I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. 15 times 4 is 60, and so that is what k is. That is stage 1 complete. So I move to stage 2. I want to find the value of y when x equals 5. And so I'm going to go back to my original equation here, and I'm now going to replace k with 60. So y equals 60 over x, and so if x equals 5, as we're told in the question, y is 60 over 5. What is 60 divided by 5? Well, that is 12. And so y is now 12 when x is 5. And you'll notice there that as x got bigger, we went up to 5. Y has actually gotten smaller. We've gone down to 12. Okay, now next one, y is inversely proportional to the cube root of x. So in this case, y is going to be proportional to, again, because it's inverse, that's going to be a 1 over, and then proportional to the cube root of x. And so we need our little symbol for cube root and x. But we want to turn that into a formula, an equation. So y equals, and again we need to multiply by k, so k, our constant, is going to go at the top, and over the cube root of x. And in this case we then need our two values that we were given in the question. When y equals 10, x equals 8. And so I've got 10 equals k over the cube root of 8. So the first thing we need to know here is what is the cube root of 8? Well, 10 equals k over cube root of 8, which is 2. And so if I want to get k, well, I'm going to have to multiply by 2 on both sides. 10 times 2 is 20. So that tells me what k is. We've completed the first stage of our working out. So I'm going to go back to the original equation we had here. Y equals, and k we now know is 20, so it's 20 over the cube root of x. And what we've been asked for is to find the value of y when x equals 64. So in this case, y equals 20 over the cube root of 64. What is the cube root of 64? Well, that is 4. So 20 over 4. Our final answer, therefore, is that y equals 5. And again, let's just have a look at that. X got bigger, but y has gotten smaller. So there's our inverse relationship. So in this case, y equals 5. Now in our final section, we've got some wordy problems just to see how these questions may look in a slightly different format. So we're told that the cost of a circular mirror is directly proportional to the square of the radius. A mirror with a radius of 8 inches costs £32. What is the radius of a mirror which costs £50? So this is still a proportion problem and it still needs setting up in the same way. But we have in this case the cost is one important factor and the radius is the other important factor, and so cost is proportional to the square of the radius, so that is r squared. But once again, we still want to turn this into an equation. This is a direct proportion and therefore it's just k times r squared, and we've got some values that we know about both. So we have a radius of 8 inches, so that is k times 8 squared, and we have a cost 32. And so we need to work out what this constant of proportionality is. So we need to work out, first of all, what 8 squared is. Well, 8 squared is 64, so that's k times 64. And then I need to find out what k is, so I'm going to divide by 64 on both sides. Now if I do that, I get 32 over 64 is the same as k. What is 32 over 64? Well, that is a half, and so k is a half, and that is absolutely fine. The proportionality constant can be a fraction, it can be a decimal, it can be a negative number, it can be anything that we want within these questions. Now we need to take that value though and bring it back to our formula. So c equals a half times r squared. And in this case, we've actually been told that the cost of a mirror is £50. So actually this question's been asked in a slightly different way. We're actually trying to find out what the radius must be given that the cost is 50. But we still just need to solve this like we would any other calculation. And so I have times a half here, which means I'm going to need to divide by a half. Now a very important fact here, if you divide by a half, that is exactly the same as multiplying by 2. And so we get 100 on this side and r squared on this side. And we want to find out what the radius must be. And therefore, I'm going to have to square root both sides. The square root of 100 is 10. And therefore that is what the radius must be. The radius must be 10 inches. In our last example, we are told that the time taken, t, to build a wall is inversely proportional to the number of builders, b. It takes 6 builders 4 days to complete the wall. How many builders are required to finish the wall in 3 days? Now this one here is something that is true to life. If you get more people working on a process, it's going to take less time. Less people, more time. So there is our inverse proportion at work. But we're going to take starting point, set it out in exactly the same way. T is proportional, but this time it's inversely proportional. So it's going to be a 1 over the number of builders, which we called b. So t is proportional to 1 over b. It takes 6 builders 4 days to complete the wall. Well, first of all, let's make our equation. So t equals, because we are multiplying by k, k will be at the top, b will be at the bottom. And then we need to put our values in. So it takes 6 builders 4 days. So 4 equals k over 6. So what does k equal? Well, that would mean multiplying by 6 on both sides. And if we do that, 4 times 6 is 24. And so that is what k is. Let's bring in the second piece of information we were given. How many builders are required to finish the wall in 3 days? Well, let's set up our equation. T equals 24 over B. And so if I want to complete it in 3 days, well, that means time is 3. So 3 equals 24 over B. How do I solve this problem to find out what B is? Well, there is a little bit of a trick in here. I need to multiply by B, but then divide by 3. So I can swap those two around. B is going to be 24 over 3. And 24 over 3 is 8. So if I want to finish the job in 3 days, I will need 8 builders. And finally we come to the exam question, and it's the Edexcel paper in June 2018, higher paper 1, so a non-calculator question, and we've been told that y is inversely proportional to d squared when d equals 10, y equals 4. D is directly proportional to x squared when x equals 2, d equals 24. Find a formula for y in terms of x. Give your answer in its simplest form. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break this question down into 3 pieces. You'll notice that the question has been set out that way. There is a gap and then another gap. That is an indication that there are 3 little stages that you're going to have to go through. And so I'm going to go with the first stage. Y is inversely proportional to d squared. So the first thing I want to do here is set that up. Y is inversely proportional to d squared, so y is proportional to 1 over d squared. And turn that into an equation. Y equals k over d squared. And then let's try and find the value of k, our constant of proportionality. So d is 10 and y is 4. So 4 equals k over 10 squared. 10 squared is 100, so I'm going to multiply by 100. 400 equals k. And so I can say from this that y equals 100 over d squared. That is part 1 dealt with. Part 2, d is directly proportional to x squared when x equals 2, d equals 24. So for this part, I'm going to have to set up another formula. So d is directly proportional to x squared. And so that means that d equals k x squared. We've been told that x is 2 and d is 24. So 24 equals k times 2 squared. 2 squared is 4, so 24 equals k times 4. So if I divide by 4, that will mean that k equals 6. And so my formula here would be that d equals 6x squared. Now part 3 asks for a formula for y in terms of x, which means I don't want to see the letter d in my final answer. I need to combine together the 2 things that I've just worked out in order to make a single final result. And so we've been told from part 1 that y equals 100 over d squared, and from part 2 that d equals 6x squared. So how can I show the relationship between y and x? Well, the key is that I need to replace this letter d with the expression we know it is equal to. So that means that y is 100 over 6x squared squared. Now it says give your answer in its simplest form. Now this is not as simple as it could be, because we need to do a little bit of work with this 6x squared squared. So that means that y is 100 over. Now if I do 6 squared, I get 36. If I do x squared squared, well, the rule there is that you multiply the powers together, so x to the power of 4. But still, that's not as simple as it could be, because there is a common factor between 100 and 36. The common factor there is 4. So if I divide both parts by 4, I get 25 as the top, and I get 9 x to the power of 4 on the bottom. And so my final answer here is y equals 25 over 9x to the power of 4.